What would it be like to write a song with Pink Floyd? Well, we get that answer from an artist who co-wrote 2 songs with them, along with the wisdom that David Gilmour passed on to him. It's an exclusive interview as well as insight into one of Floyd's last albums. It's next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you remember that beautiful, truly beautiful exhilaration of waiting outside the record store for hours in anticipation of getting your hands on your favorite artist's new record back in the day, you're going to dig this channel. We try to bring back that feeling as best as possible. Make sure to subscribe below, click the bell so you never miss out. And also, if you look at our Patreon, we give you more content that helps us keep this channel going. Now, every Pink Floyd fan knows that, or remembers for that matter, that 6.5-year wait of absolute pain and anguish for their new studio album to drop. 1987 to 1994 seemed like an eternity to wait for the Division Bell. Written mostly by singer-guitarist David Gilmour and keyboardist Richard Wright, with contributions from Gilmour's then fiancée and now wife, novelist Polly Sampson, and of course Nick Laird Clowes of the Dream Academy, as well as experimental music composer Anthony Moore of Slap Happy. It was well worth the wait, really was. Produced by longtime Floyd collaborator Bob Ezrin and Gilmour, as well as engineer Andy Jackson, and saxophonist Dick Berry and bassist Guy Pratt. It started in January of 1993 when Gilmour, drummer Nick Mason, and keyboardist Richard Wright began experimenting with new material at Britannia Row Studios. Guy Pratt, who had been brought in during the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour, he came in and he did have a really profound influence on the mood of the new music. They had gotten past the legal issues that plagued them during the making of their 1987 album, Momentary Lapse of Reason. David Gilmour was relieved, more apt to create. They moved the sessions actually a few times during the production of the Division Bell, including David Gilmour's houseboat and the Studio Astoria. They were really creating a lot of music at that point. Some estimate between 60 and 70 pieces of music. As they progressed with the album, that turned into 27, and then they got rid of some songs, merged others together, and in the end, they transformed what they had into 11 tracks, and the band all voted on what they wanted on that final track list. As I said, David Gilmour's fiancée at the time, Polly Sampson, contributed lyrically on many of the songs, including the singles Take It Back, and High Hopes. The grass was greener, amongst a lot of other songs. Now, it's my understanding this frustrated some that were involved, including producer Bob Ezrin, although later he admitted that Polly had inspired Gilmour and that she pulled the album together, helping Gilmour, who had just gone through a divorce, and he was battling some demons in the form of substance abuse. The Division Bell was a thematic album with ideas that surrounded communication and talking to solve problems. Taking its title from the division bells that rung to summon MPs or members of the House of Lords to vote in the UK Parliament, actually the idea was suggested at the last moment in the absence of a good alternative, as I understand it. It was suggested by Gilmour's friend, sci-fi writer Douglas Adams, who, of course, wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The album was definitely personal. It was insight into Gilmour's psyche, though he has said that he prefers to let the listeners draw their own meaning. There's so many just poignant moments of elegance and dignity throughout this record. You have to remember, this was a short time after the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, that exhilaration from that is very apparent on the track A Great Day for Freedom. On the day the wall came down, they threw... High Hopes is really about Gilmour's youth in Cambridge and leaving his hometown behind, written from his perspective. How green it was on the other side. It also references Syd Barrett. In fact, the final couplet from the song, The Endless River, Forever and Ever, is a tip of the hat to a line from their second single, See Emily Play, from '67. Float on a River, Forever and Ever. That would later inspire the name of their final studio album, The Endless River, 2014. Shortly after the song ends and the chimes fade out, there is the famous hidden track, a brief phone call between the band's manager, Steve O'Rourke, and Gilmour's stepson, Charlie. Very cool. You know, someday we'll have to do a track-by-track breakdown of this amazing album. Maybe we can get some members of Floyd. That'd be amazing. My favorite song off this album is the first single, Take It Back. It actually might be my personal favorite song by Pink Floyd, period. Let me explain. So I distinctly remember sloughing school and driving to the Pine Ridge Mall in Pocatello, Idaho in the waning days of March '94 to get my hands on the Division Bell. The moment that they pulled up the gate at Musicland, I was in my element. I'll never forget how that album sounded. The absolute elation that I felt as I drove down the freeway listening to it with incomparable joy, the kind of glee of a child on Christmas morning opening presents.
It sounds like the waves on the sea.
Now, sometimes we listen to a song, numerous times. It doesn't quite connect with us until much later. That's how Pet Sounds was for me, for example. It took a second for me to really appreciate its magnitude. And that's how Take It Back was for me. So let's fast forward to late summer of the following year. I had just graduated from high school, and I spent that summer working construction in Washington State to put money away for my future. I mean, that was a crazy summer. I worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for almost 4 months. I was about to go home for a few weeks before I would leave my home and the small town that I had grown up in for good. At this point, I was really anxious to get home, and I was given the opportunity to go home about a week earlier than I'd anticipated, as the crew who I came up with, who I drove up with, they were going to stay longer. But I was asked by a coworker of mine if I would drive his grandmother in her old Cadillac the 9+ hours back to Idaho as her eyesight was fading. And she only lived about 15, 20 minutes away from my parents' home, so I would just drop her off and then a friend would meet me and take me to my house. Anyway, so I drove the whole way, and I'll never forget it. She actually snored the entire way home, all 9+ hours. I gotta say, there were a few moments where I thought I was gonna have like a National Lampoon's Vacation situation where she seemed like she might be dead.
Don't be silly.
She's not fine, Clark. She's dead.
I mean, she never woke up the whole drive, not one time. Just when I'd start to shake her to make sure that she was still alive, she'd just start snoring again like a bear. So her car didn't have a tape deck. So I was at the mercy of whatever radio stations would come in without static and, those who would play some decent music. So I was pretty bored. I was trying to keep alert, stay awake. Naturally, my mind started to wander. I started to realize that this was an important moment in my life. High school was over, as was the last summer of my youth. And within a few weeks, I'd be moving into the very first steps of adulthood. Just as that impact of that reality really hit me, I heard a familiar song come on the radio. It was Pink Floyd, Take It Back. It was as if I was hearing it for the very first time, and it seemed to absolutely invade my entire being. It was one of the hinge points of my life. I was at the crossroads of my fading youth and first glimpse of adulthood. Fear and confusion were just running through my veins. I was starting to ask the big questions in my mind. What was I going to do for a living? How would I get by? What would happen to the friendships and the deep relationships that I had, because I'd be leaving? What did the future hold? Just as I felt these overwhelming questions start to overtake my soul, I heard David Gilmour's poignant meanderings. We were spinning into darkness. The earth was on fire. Just as he said that, I could see flames on top of a mountain from miles away. There was a fire, brush fire. He was not only speaking about my personal feelings, he was describing the landscape as I was driving. As I heard David Gilmour's hypnotic guitar and his defiant vocals, I don't know how to say this without just saying it. It was one of those rare moments in life where you and the song become one. Now, I know that technically the song is about Mother Earth and the eventual demise of our planet due to our own ignorance. Some have said it's a song about our relationships and how we take each other for granted. I've heard a few different thoughts about it. As many of the artists I interview always say, though, the song means whatever each listener thinks it means. For me, it was not so much about the lyrics. It was more about the music and the feelings that it elicited. I was saying goodbye to my innocence, to my youth, and I could never go back. When Gilmour sang, "Now I've seen the warning, screaming from all sides. It's easy to ignore them, and God knows I've tried. All of this temptation, it turned my faith to lies." Until I couldn't see the danger or hear the rising tide. For me at that moment, I was seeing the warnings all around me, that the future was really scary. And that no matter how hard I tried, as Thomas Wolfe once said, you can't go home again. I knew that no matter how many times I tried to return to my youth, that innocence, that beautiful nostalgic place that I remembered from my past, it would never be the same. I'll never forget that perfect duality of song and life experience coming together. And ever since, every time I hear this song, it takes me back to that moment when I was truly at the crossroads of my life. So grateful to David Gilmour and Pink Floyd for that. So I was fortunate, really fortunate to speak with singer-songwriter Nick Laird Clowes, who actually co-wrote Take It Back. Also Pulls Apart with David Gilmour and Polly Samson. And he told me about that experience as well as some personal insight into David Gilmour as his mentor. As many of you know, David Gilmour produced Nick's beautiful 1985 hit with the Dream Academy, Life in a Northern Town, one of the greatest songs of that year. Life in a Northern Town. The mini documentary, I'll link to it below. Up next, I'm going to share Nick's experience with David. As we go into this interview, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. Right now, if you go to Zenni.com, you can get 10% off your first order whenever you need a new pair of glasses or sunglasses. You got to go to Zenni.com. Do it. Make sure also to look at their amazing features like blue blocks. I've talked about that before. It's been a game changer for me. Anti-glare, anti-fog. Here's the story.
So after the Dream Academy split up, I went traveling to the East, and then I got asked by Pat Leonard and Richard Page to come and work with them. They were on Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers wanted me to write with them on a project called Third Matinee. I worked for a couple of months on that, probably 3 months, and then I came back to London. And when I came back to London, David Gilmour had started working on the second album that without Roger that he was, and he said, look, I'm in the middle of this thing. Can I play you some of the things I've been doing? Now, I'd been sitting in a studio with Pat Leonard and Richard Page writing songs. So I was completely focused on, so I came in and my chops were good. Again, I said, yeah, that's good, but this bit's boring. Well, that's right. Are those your finished vocals or what? Anyway, he said, why don't you come in and produce my vocals? That's how it started. He He said, look, the engineer, no one can tell me that I have to go in and hear if they're right. You know, because we've been in the studio so much, you know if they're right. So come in. So I started working on that. Then he was working with Polly Sampson on the songs. And then they'd say, well, why don't you come over and we'll play you some of the new songs that we've got and that aren't written yet. And I'd come in and I'd listen and I'd say, let's take it back. I said, I love this song. I wasn't called Take It Back. I said, I love this one. So now we're into about our second or third month, and he played me Poles Apart, and I said, I love that. He said, I've got no lyrics. And they both said, we're not sure where this is going. And I said, hey, tell me about your relationship with Syd Barrett. We know about Roger's relationship. He was your friend. You went camping together when he was 16. And he said, well, I never thought he'd lose that light in his eyes. He said, hold on. I never thought he'd lose that light in his eyes. And then we were off.
And that you'd never lose the light in your eyes.
We worked for an hour or two, all three of us together. And then he said, congratulations. I think you've written your first song on a Pink Floyd album. He went down to his cellar and he bought up a bottle of very special wine, which was fantastic. He had this song about nature and Take It Back and, you know, a Gaia theory. And I just loved it. That's incredible. And they hadn't got everything right and we worked on it together, but it wasn't quite right. And finally, it was the last song on the album. It was the last song for the album. And I drove back unsteadily home and I pulled the car over to the side of the road and I just got a flow on those last four lines on the album. On the song. And got home, woke up the next morning, thought, now I've got to sell them on the four lines because they're great, they're perfect. But are they going to think they are? And I said, I've got to come and see you. And I went and I did the four lines and they both went, it's brilliant. So that was it. Song was done. So that's how it happened.
I knew it was about the earth, about Mother Earth.
Nature, what we're experiencing now. You know, I was just in the floods in Germany and the fires going on the West Coast. I mean, it's still going on.
Well, that was just so brilliant about David Gilmour is he's such an underappreciated vocalist too. He's just so incredible.
His style of singing is so fantastic. He sings with an English accent and he sings without much expression. And Syd Barrett did that too, but he has this wonderful English, comfortably numb. Fantastic. I never stop. And I always say to him, you're my favorite guitarist in the world, apart from Neil Young.
Southern man, better keep your head.
And he really is. I mean, he's just, because he solos and he goes off into some incredible place and takes you into the stratosphere, but he'll always come back to the riff that matters when you need it.
You nailed it. That's exactly right. And what would you say is the most profound thing that you've learned or admired from David Gilmour, though, that you added to your repertoire for song composition?
Well, the thing I'd said before about following what you believe it should be to the detriment of you just have to stick to your guns and the record will fail as much as you fail to stick to your guns for your vision. That was one. And two, his use of echoes and delays, digital delay, digital delay, don't. And when you put that with reverb, you make the sound like as big as a cave, or that in itself is an art.
Encumbered forever by desire and ambition.
He taught me about that. And that's how you make the world of your music. Before I met him and learned those things, I couldn't get my records the way I wanted them to sound. And sound effects was the third major important thing. I loved sound effects. I wanted them to be part of the musique concrète vibe, and Floyd knew about it. Well, he doesn't just put in this sound of a dog barking or a car going. He makes a sound world with 7 or 8 different bits, and that's lovingly crafted. I learned all my studio techniques from him.
Make sure to leave us a comment about Pink Floyd and the Division Bell album. What are your memories of this absolutely breathtaking composition? Take it back. Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear some of your stories. If you like this video, we invite you to subscribe. This is a place where we talk passionately about all things music. We try to go home again. We never quite get there, but we try. Anyway, check us out on Patreon. Help us keep the music alive. Until next time, seriously, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.